Amanda Knox's trial. Over the weekend, the defense called its last witness. Now, after spending nearly 2 years in an Italian jail, she and her family will finally learn her fate. Here's our David Muir.
After 7 months of hearings and more than 100 witnesses, the final witnesses took the stand over the weekend. Among them, a DNA expert called by Amanda Knox's defense team, who took aim at the kitchen knife prosecutors believe was the weapon used to murder British student Meredith Kercher. Prosecutors say Amanda Knox's DNA was found on the handle and that her roommate Kercher's DNA was found on the blade. But the expert told the court that that DNA was too minuscule to be reliable and that the knife easily could have been inadvertently contaminated at the lab. Amanda Knox's attorneys also point out it's never been proven that that was the actual knife, a coroner testifying it doesn't even match the injuries. Prosecutors have tried to convince the court it was Amanda Knox's then-boyfriend, Italian Rafael Sollecito, who held Meredith Kercher by the shoulders as Amanda Knox fatally stabbed her. But with closing arguments now expected next, Amanda Knox's attorneys will not only point to these new questions surrounding the knife, they'll also point out that none of Amanda Knox's DNA was actually found in Meredith Kercher's bedroom. They'll point to Amanda Knox's own testimony, explaining discrepancies in her stories to police. Amanda Knox originally told police she recalled a vision of herself cowering in the kitchen as Kercher was killed, but later said she was instead at her boyfriend's house the entire night. Knox testified that confusion was the result of brutal police interrogation, that investigators had slapped her on the head and called her a liar. And finally, the defense will point to a third person, Rudy Gaudet, a local who sold drugs, who has already been convicted in the murder. The defense will point out that he was with Meredith Kercher at a party the night before her murder, and that it was his DNA and his DNA alone found in the room where Kercher was murdered. For Good Morning America, David Muir, ABC News, New York.
And joining us now live from Seattle is attorney Ann Bremner. She's also a spokesperson for Friends of Amanda Knox. And Ann, thank you very much for joining us this morning. I know you've been in contact with her family. How are they doing right now?
Well, I think that they're hopeful that justice will be done, Robin, this morning. But, you know, this has been every parent's nightmare, and it's been such a long journey that we're coming up on 2-year anniversary, the 2-year anniversary of this horrible crime, which was committed by a person that's been convicted and is in prison.
Amanda's defense team seems to be hinging their case on implications of contaminated evidence and tampering and such, trying to, of course, establish a reasonable doubt that we often hear in American court system. But how is it different there in Italy, Ann?
It's a completely different system. First of all, these jurors aren't questioned like they are here about what they've read, what their biases may be. They don't have to be unanimous. There are 8 jurors and 2 judges. And then in terms of their deliberation process, they have input from the judge that's different than what we have here in the United States. We have a great system here, and it's something so different that we see in Italy. And what the defense has done here is try to look at this evidence and say, you know, witnesses can and do lie, or they can be mistaken,
right,
but the evidence never lies.
Well, you know, part of the problem here in her defense is that the conflicting statement she made when she was being questioned by the police. And her defense, of course, put up a psychologist and trying to explain her state of mind at the time. Do you think they did a good case of pleading her side of it there?
I do. We have the Miranda rule in the United States about coerced confessions, that you have a right to a lawyer, you have a right to remain silent, those types of things that we take for granted. She was questioned for over 41 hours, overnight, was hit in the head, and there were also stressors there and suggestibility. So, you know, it's a whole different situation. And finally, they asked her to imagine what could have happened had she been there.
And so what happens now? And we know that the last witness has been called, is closing arguments. I know, again, it's different from what it is here in the U.S.
It's absolutely so different. Of course, it's based on Roman law. Ours is common law from Britain. But the fact is, there may be an independent inquiry. We don't know. They're going to reconvene on the 9th and 10th of October to look into that issue. But then if that's not brought underway, then there'll be closing arguments, which could go on for some time. But, you know, they're not in session. They weren't in session. There was a hiatus over the entire summer.
Right.
And they've been in session generally like a couple of days a week.
Well, you've been watching this closely, of course, Ann, and you're an attorney. What's your gut? I mean, when you're all this evidence, what do you think?
I'm cautiously optimistic. I think injustice anywhere is injustice everywhere. And this is a case that we've been closely watching in Seattle. They're watching it in Europe, and now I think the world is watching. But the evidence right now, there's no evidence that links her at all. It's not the murder weapon involved. The DNA doesn't match. There's not enough to even be measured. There's no physical evidence at all to connect her to this crime. And I think reasonable doubt is clearly established.
Yeah, the world is watching, as you said. And
yes.
Thank you for your insight and
My
let her
pleasure.
family know that
Thank
we're
you.
thinking of her. Thanks so much.